Before I start this episode, I wanted to send out a rest in peace to John Gaudreau and Matthew Gaudreau. John Gaudreau was a NHL player for Columbus, and Matthew Gaudreau, who was his younger brother, played for the minor leagues, I believe. They passed away, I think, yesterday. While both were riding their bikes, they were struck by a drunk driver. And, you know, moments like this really put into perspective how precious life is, and how it's a blessing every day to leave your house and to come back. John Gaudreau and Matthew Gaudreau did absolutely nothing wrong for what the reports are saying, and unfortunately they passed away. I send condolences out to their families. I guess one saving grace and one beautiful thing about this is every story you hear about John Gaudreau and about Matthew Gaudreau, they were great people. John Gaudreau was a father, was a husband, and I know Matthew was a husband. I just want to send my condolences. And moments like this really emphasize the fact of sports is just a thing. It's just a game. And life is the ultimate prize. And when it's lost, it really puts into perspective. So, again, I want to say rest in peace to John Gaudreau and Matthew Gaudreau, both losing their lives while being struck by a drunk driver the other night. So I'm going to do rest in peace to them in a moment of silence before we start this episode. Now let's start the episode. Welcome. I would like to welcome you to episode 450 of the Unpopular Podcast. This is the man, the myth, the legend, Jalen Hunter. And here at the Unpopular Podcast, I don't really ask you to agree with me. I'm asking you to hear me out. So we are here. College football, for the college football fans, for the college football lovers, we are here. We have finally reached the point. Well, we had week 0, and we'll talk about that in a second. And we had a game yesterday that we'll talk about, but we are here. I'm excited for college football. I'm excited because there's a newfound system that's been implemented this year that we'll talk about moving forward a little bit in the episode. But where I wanted to start is I don't advise anybody to do, well, let's talk about this Brandon Aiyuk situation for a second. Let me first say shout out to Brandon Aiyuk for finally getting the deal that he was looking for, I guess, signing a 4-year, $120 million deal. Brandon Aiyuk is one of those receivers that understands his importance to the team and wanted to get compensated for it, and the deal that obviously came was the 4-year, $120 million. But what's so fascinating is a lot of elements to this negotiation, to this deal, doesn't usually happen. And this is what I mean. So reports are coming out saying this was the first deal that the 49ers offered Brandon Aiyuk. Meaning, when we first got to the negotiation table over months and months ago, the first deal that was put on the table is 4 years, $120 million. The reason why I said that this is crazy, and this usually doesn't happen, is usually I respect wholeheartedly what Brandon Aiyuk decided to do. What Brandon Aiyuk decided to do was he felt he was worth more than 4 years, $120 million. So what he did was he said, I'm not signing that. I'm instead going to hold out and going to test I'm not going to say test his market because he's not a free agent, but he did not want to play for that amount of money. He felt he was worth more. I'm not here saying if he was or if he wasn't. That's obviously what he felt. But then he felt the market. Then he saw the market. And while there was a plethora of teams that would love and could use a Brandon Aiyuk right now, I don't know how many teams were willing to pay the 4 years, $120 million or even more. Because again, he didn't want 4 years, $120 million to start, seeing as though that was the number one offer. He felt he was worth more. So when you heard teams like the Steelers, you heard teams like the Commanders, he wanted to get paid like a top tier wide receiver. And while I don't know if he is a top tier wide receiver, what I do know is he is uber important for the 49ers. But the thing, and this is the most fascinating part about this whole situation, usually if you have a deal on the table and you let it sit there, you say, you know what, I don't want to take that deal. I think I deserve more. And you come back realizing, oh, shoot, like I test the market or the market isn't really favored in what I want. When you come back, you usually don't have the same deal. Teams usually go, all right, well, you see what your value is. You see what teams are willing to pay you. We're not about to pay you that because teams aren't even going to pay you that. So usually that first deal is off the table, and then you go back to the negotiation table and usually get less. I guess that's a shout out to both Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers, because usually Brandon Aiyuk will not get anywhere close to that first deal, because once you test the market and once you realize that really only one team is willing to offer you what you think you deserve or close to what you think you deserve, that team usually starts to lowball you, because again, you started hearing reports saying the Steelers are out because the 49ers were asking so much. The Commanders were out because the 49ers were asking so much. In fact, I think there was a deal on the table for Brandon Aiyuk to go to the Cleveland Browns for like Amari Cooper and a bunch of picks, but Brandon Aiyuk didn't want to do that deal. Which kind of brings me to my second observation with this negotiation process that we just saw with Brandon Aiyuk. I am all for player empowerment. I am all for a player being able to dictate where he wants to go. I feel that a player should have the ultimate say-so, because ultimately this is his career. This is his livelihood or her livelihood. A player in any sport should be able to have the final say-so of where they want to go and where they want their career to go. I am all for player empowerment. But with player empowerment, I think you have to understand exactly what that comes with. Once you make a decision that where you're currently at ain't working for you, or once you make that decision that you're not getting compensated the way that you want to, so you ask out to another place, I think you have to be cautious, because there were some missteps, I believe, that Brandon Aiyuk took. I don't know if he would have got more money in Cleveland. But once you say, I don't want to go there, I don't want to stay here, and you don't really have the leverage outside of the fact of you can deny your services, which he was doing, as i.e. holding out, you can't then say, hey, you know what, I don't want to be here, but I'm not going there. That's kind of crazy. I guess in one sense you do have that power, because you're still under contract for your previous or your former team or your current team. But I don't know, man. But I am happy that Brandon Aiyuk essentially got the deal. That was 4 years, $120 million is still a lot of money for a wide receiver that a lot of people could consider to be the second option on their own team. when you have Deebo Samuels, you can argue who is wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. Now, if you look at production-wise, Brandon Aiyuk is probably up there. But I am happy that he got his deal. See, and now a lot of people are saying that all the issues for the 49ers are done. Brandon Aiyuk got his deal. You know, this team is trying to run it back as far as get back to the Super Bowl. Hold your horses. You got Brandon Aiyuk deal done. There's still a deal. There's still a player, your most important player. Think about that, man. I've had people argue with me about who was a Hall of Famer, who was not a Hall of Famer. And one of the craziest arguments I think I've got, or debates. Let's say debates, because argument just seems so strong and one-sided. Debates that I got into was, is Trent Williams a Hall of Famer? I'm like, wait. This person was trying to talk me down, saying that Trent Williams is not a Hall of Famer. And I'm like, there's a reason why. Year after year after year, when that whole NFL top 100 thing comes out, which is the top 100 players voted on by their peers, there's a reason why almost every single year Trent Richardson is in the top 10. Or Trent Williams, I'm sorry. Why do I keep saying Trent Richardson? Trent Williams is in the top 10. There's a lot of times where Trent Williams is in the top 6 or 7. I brought up Trent Williams because he is still the last person to hold out and waiting for his contract. And let me tell you, I don't care how good Brock Purdy is. I don't care how good George Kittle is. I don't care how good Brandon Aiyuk is. I don't care how good Deebo Samuels is. I do not care how good Christian McCaffrey is. You can argue that Christian McCaffrey, in fact, it's kind of an arguable after last year that Christian McCaffrey is the best wide receiver or running back in football. It's kind of, you can kind of argue, but it's kind of inarguable that the best wide receiver duo right now is Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel. And if you want to throw in George Kittle, you can do that. The 49ers have one of the best skill position groups the league has seen. None of that matters if you do not have Trent Williams. We've seen the production of Brock Purdy go down incredibly without Trent Williams. He's the best tackle in football by a country mile. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the Bengals and what I was talking about with Jamar Chase, who still doesn't have a deal. We'll talk about that in a brief second. But the last thing you want to do is go into a season with uncertainty, especially uncertainty with your best players. And that's why I commend the 49ers for getting a deal done with Brandon Aiyuk. The last thing you want to do is go into a season not having your second, some can argue, best wide receiver option. But now it's time to get Trent Williams done. Trent Williams is your most important player, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Because if there's no Trent Williams, there's always going to be a massive hole in that offensive line. And in that case, I don't know if Brock Purdy is good enough to overcome such a massive loss, such a massive force not there, you know. But back to the original point. Shouts out to Brandon Aiyuk for getting his deal, 4 years, $120 million. And I'm not going to talk about it for long because I kind of emphasized it last episode. Go check it out when I did my breakdown of the AFC North as well as AFC West. But when I talked about the Bengals, I talked about how I feel the Bengals have shown themselves to be a poorly run organization. The only reason why we consider the Bengals a top tier organization right now is because of the players that they have. Because you have Joe Burrow, because you have Jamar Chase, because you have T. Higgins. You know, those three right there turn the tide of an offense and turn the tide of a team. But kind of like it's also hand in hand with the CeeDee Lamb situation that was the days, the more and more you let sit, the more and more you let a player look at the market, and the more and more day after day the market changes, it spells doom for you. Or it gets worse and worse for you, i.e. the organization. That's also where the Cowboys are with Dak Prescott. You see people like Trevor Lawrence get paid. You see people like Jordan Love get paid. You see people like Tua Tagovailoa get paid. All these people are comparable to Dak Prescott, and a lot of statistics say that Dak Prescott has been better than those quarterbacks. Yet and still, Dak Prescott is waiting for his deal. Now, obviously, he's gonna play, but it's like you're costing yourself more money while you wait. Same thing with CeeDee Lamb. When you saw all the wide receivers that got paid this offseason, you were costing yourself more money. Same, what I thought, but obviously not, with Brandon Aiyuk. You say you don't want to get the money, or you say you don't want to play here, and you see people like Justin Jefferson, now CeeDee Lamb get paid, and it's like, all right. I think CeeDee Lamb was the saving grace for the 49ers. Seeing what CeeDee Lamb got, and in all statistics, CeeDee Lamb is better. And overall, CeeDee Lamb is a better player, or has been a better player, I'll say, than Brandon Aiyuk. I think that's what really showed Brandon Aiyuk, all right, this is what I'm worth. Going back to the Bengals, you can argue that behind Justin Jefferson, behind Tyreek Hill, is Jamar Chase. And the fact that Jamar Chase has come out and say he wants a new deal, he's even holding in, even though he practiced one day, the next day he showed up 13 minutes late and didn't practice. You're costing yourself money day after day when you see people like Brandon Aiyuk, people like CeeDee Lamb get paid. And this is just an organization. I guess they rest on their laurels, but it's like, what are we doing? Those are one of these organizations we very rarely pay people, early. Okay, well, again, this is a new day. You're not what player? Do you know how many options a player has? I understand that it's still like the league run by front offices, but do you understand how many options a player can have? Do you understand how vital and detrimental it would have been if Brandon Aiyuk did not play for this team? How you can pretty much just throw the whole Super Bowl aspirations out the window if Brandon Aiyuk wasn't playing. Do you understand how detrimental it would have been if CeeDee Lamb didn't play? So you just kind of, all right, I guess. But you got to understand who really has the most cards. Especially if your goal is to win a Super Bowl, you need it with players. And when you have players as good as Brandon Aiyuk, as good as CeeDee Lamb, and for the Cincinnati Bengals, as good as Jamar Chase, the last thing you want to do is have them sit there upset, angry, looking at the market, seeing all these players that are comparable or even not as good as them get paid. I want everyone to get paid, man. I want everyone to get what they deserve. And Jamar Chase feels like he deserves more than what his current contract, which is ending soon, warrants, and rightfully so. And shouts out to Brandon Aiyuk for getting the deal. I hear a lot of people saying, well, why did you do all this? Why not? Why would, if Brandon Aiyuk felt like he deserved more than what they were offering, why would you want him to just take the first thing? I am commending the 49ers for giving them or keeping the first deal, because usually that doesn't happen, especially when the first deal was pretty much denied. So shouts out to everyone involved. Shouts out to Brandon Aiyuk for getting paid. Let's go over to college football, because I think this year is a fascinating year, because I'm going to talk about it a little more in detail later, but what we saw, let's just talk about what we saw. Now, this happened last week, but I do want to address it. I want to address Georgia Tech beating Florida State. Again, I'm going to, in more detail, talk about it a little bit later when I give my prediction of the 12 teams that I feel are going to make it in the college football playoffs. But week 0, the biggest game of week 0 was Georgia Tech against Florida State overseas. And Georgia Tech ultimately beat Florida State. Because of the college football playoffs expanding to 12 teams, what it essentially did was it made games like this extremely vital for teams like a Georgia Tech, and maybe not as detrimental for teams like Florida State. Shouts out to Georgia Tech for beating Florida State. I think it was an incredible game, and it shows you the power of momentum and preparation. Before we get to a bigger, broader statement, let's talk about what we saw in this game. Now, obviously, I know what happened a week ago. If you don't want to hear it, I have timestamps on the bottom. You can just skip through it. I completely understand. Sticking to a game plan, having an idea of how you're going to attack a team, how you're going to play, how you're going to execute is a little more important in college football than it is in the NFL or professional. Because a lot of these kids that are playing are not professionals. That's no offense to them. It's just honesty. And when you're professional, a lot of times you can go off script. You can have audibles. You can get punched in the mouth and then come back and still overcome. What the Georgia Tech Florida State game showed me is a couple things. The first one is Florida State did not expect Georgia Tech to be as prepared as they were. I don't think Florida State thought that Georgia Tech, when you hear the name Florida State, right, especially this year, they're coming in, or when they came in, they were ranked 10th. A lot of people have them winning the ACC. There's still a little bit of anger that Florida State has towards the NCAA for what they felt was being snubbed last year in the college football playoffs. And you have one of the top transfers in DJU. I'm not even going to attempt his last name, but DJU. And this was one of the most lopsided money lines that you would have seen. Like, no one expected Georgia Tech outside of the wrestler Sheamus, because he went and he predicted it. He went on College Game Day and predicted that Georgia Tech was going to beat Florida State. But just like us as fans hear it, just like anchors and analysts hear it, the players hear it. And I think that's one of the hardest things as a coach to do is, you're not as good as you think. Yes, I understand that we're projected to be here, but we haven't played a game yet. And there's a reason why they say any given Sunday, you can lose to anyone. Hell, it kind of reminds me of when this happened a couple times last year in the NFL when the Raiders beat the Chiefs, when the Cardinals beat the Philadelphia Eagles. It happens. But you saw the team that it felt like going into it, they had all the confidence without earning the confidence. And once they got punched in the mouth by Georgia Tech, it was curtains. Which brings me to the second point. I'm looking at DJU. DJ Ungale, I think that's his name. DJ Ungale. I'm not saying that the season for Florida State is over. Which, again, we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth when I give my prediction for the 12 teams. But what I will say is this. That was a detrimental game for not just the confidence of DJU, but for the confidence of the fans of Florida State. We saw DJU struggle last year on a different team when you were projected to be high. And when you're a transfer, this is why I think that it's so important, especially for quarterback transfers going to a bigger school. I think the first game, look, I could be wrong, obviously, but I don't think that there's an avenue for Oregon to lose the first game. They have a lower tier school. Oregon is projected to be a very high school by the end of the year. I don't foresee them losing. However, I think this is a huge game for Dylan Gabriel. You're coming from Oklahoma. You're following Bo Nix, who, while yes, he played until he was 150, but he has a bunch of Oregon records. He has a bunch of college football records at this point. It's important to get the fans behind you early. And what DJ did was he brought more doubt into the picture. He looked awful. In fact, he's one of the biggest reasons why, yes, I understand. He's one of the biggest reasons why Florida State lost that game. You can say it was the defense, yes, but the defense was on the field so much that they had to overcome. It was tough to overcome. I think this was a huge win for Georgia Tech. I don't think it was a huge loss for Florida State. And we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, another team and another game I want to talk about before I give my prediction was what we saw between Colorado and North Dakota State. Colorado squeaked out a win. I think it was like 31-26 or something. Let's talk about the facts. Let's talk about what is in front of us. You have a team in Colorado that had a bad year last year. And I think one of the biggest reasons why they had a bad year last year, or why last year felt so bad, even though if you really look, Colorado came from like the worst record in the Pac-12 to, I think they had like 4 wins last year. The reason why it was so bad, or it felt worse than it really should have felt, is because of expectation. You bring in Deion Sanders, you bring in Shakur Sanders, you bring in Travis Hunter. You have all this hype around Colorado, and rightfully so. And You also beat TCU. Now, this was before we knew that TCU was just going to be awful last year. TCU was terrible. But going into the season, you think that TCU has a shot of being really good. So when you beat TCU, it's like, all right, bet. We just beat TCU. And then they start rattling off win after win after win. Then you get to 4-0. You're hype. You're happy. It's like, let's get it. Then you play Oregon. And Oregon beats the brakes off of you. And then you start playing tougher school after tougher school after tougher school. And, again, there's all the hype in the world doesn't help you during the game. And I'm not saying that to be condescending. I'm not saying that to be mean. It's just true. You can come in all the hype, all the expectation in the world, but as we see, you still have to play the games. And last year, I feel like, you had famous person after famous person, star after star, give their support, go to a Colorado game. College Game Day went to Colorado or did their games a couple times. The hype was just there. And the fact that they didn't win, it is what it is. But let me show you, let's talk about what we know. We know that Colorado is coming off a bad season. We know that Shakur Sanders and Travis Hunter are going to be names that you hear amongst some of the top college football players in the nation and will probably be drafted incredibly high. We also know that this team, I think, has 43 transfers. And I don't think people understand how crazy that is. Some people would be lucky to have 43 transfers their entire college tenured. Like a coach would be ecstatic to have 43 transfers in 10 years combined. The fact that Colorado had 43 transfers over the summer makes me believe that we should not expect a great season from Colorado. And rightfully so. I think projections have them finishing 11th in the pack in the was it the Big 12? When you have that much turnover, that much movement, it takes players a while to learn themselves, learn to play with their teammates. When you looked at that North Dakota State game, didn't it feel extremely similar to a lot of the losses that Colorado had? Whether we talk about their offense, Sanders and Hunter are incredible. Hunter made the pretty much game-winning catch that was, in fact, the game-winning catch that was incredible. SportsCenter top 10. It was I don't know how the hell he contorted his body to catch that, especially with the defender draped all over him. But he did it. Shakur Sanders had, I think, 5 touchdowns, 400-plus yards. They're going to be electric. But, like last year, they both were electric. However, the defense was trash. Just like, North Dakota State was getting anything they wanted on Colorado. I think Colorado really, obviously there were some stops, but Colorado's offensive line was terrible. Defensive, everything was pretty much terrible, which is why you saw the game being so close. I have all the respect in the world for Deion Sanders. I have all the respect in the world for the Colorado program. I have all respect in the world for any person that's playing anything. I think it is a daunting task to take an organization from the literal bottom to college football playoff aspirations in a span of 2 years. I didn't say it can't be done, and I am hoping that it gets done. I would love to see it. But when you have 43 transfers, which means that it's going to take them a while to learn each other. When your defense is still terrible, your offensive line is still terrible because, again, they're trying to gel. Most of those 43 transfer on the defensive side of the ball and the offensive line. I don't expect much success from Colorado this year. Now, which then brings, on top of that, there's always going to be a level of celebrity, a level of stardom that Deion Sanders has. That's just, there's nothing Deion Sanders can do at this point. That's just who he is. And I'm not saying that he needs to turn it down. That stardom got him here. Whether you talk, he's one of the greatest football players we have ever seen. He's one of the greatest dual threat players. And what I mean by that is he played football and baseball. He's the only player, I think, in NFL history or sports history that has both a World Series and a Super Bowl. So there's always going to be a level of cachet, a level of stardom when we talk about Deion Sanders. And I heard somebody, I don't remember who it was, but I heard someone it's like a reporter that was reporting on ESP or reporting on Colorado and was saying that it feels Hollywood every single day. There's a camera crew every single day. The players feel like stars. Obviously, the biggest star in the room is always going to be Deion Sanders. And I don't know if that bodes well for success, especially in the college level. Now, I'm not blaming Deion Sanders for it. That's just what it is. When you get to a level of stardom, there's just things you can't do. I don't think Drake can just walk to 7-Eleven, get a sweet tea, and then walk back home. I think he's above. Beyonce definitely can't just go into a Walmart. You know what I'm saying? They have built themselves to that level of stardom that they can't do regular things. And while I'm not saying coaching Colorado was a regular thing, I think that there's always going to be a level of quote unquote Hollywood because Deion Sanders is Deion Sanders. Plus you have his son. Plus you have Travis Hunter. Both are going to go high in the draft or projected to go high in the draft. I think that this is going to be a fun year. I don't have any doubts that Colorado is going to be fun to watch. But I just don't know how long it's going to take for it to start clicking. Because they almost lost to North Dakota State. And that's no offense to North Dakota State, but what happens when you play a ranked team? What happens when you play a top-tier team? It's going to be interesting, but shouts out to them for beating North Dakota State. I've alluded to it a couple times. Now, obviously, I'm going to give my prediction for who I feel will make the college football playoffs. Obviously, this is the first year where it expands from 4 teams to 12. I ultimately think the final duration, the final edition of this college football playoffs is going to be 16 teams. Obviously, they're still talking about it, but this is the first year that we have 12 teams. When I talked about Georgia Tech and Florida State, I said that this was a monumental win for Georgia Tech. It was a marginal, even though obviously at the moment it felt major, but it was a marginal loss for Florida State. I don't have to remind you guys that, and the end all be all, college football is a business. Just like the NFL is a business, the NBA is a business, the MLB is a business, the NHL is a business. All of it is a business. And the business of sports is to put the best product out there. Now, for people that hear me say that and think that means that sports is somehow rigged, no. I understand that there's betting going on. I understand there's gambling. There has come out back in the day that there were obviously some refs that kind of went rogue and did their own thing. But the goal of sports is to put the best product out there. And when we talk about the college football playoffs, this is the first year that there are 12 teams. And I said this before when they first announced that there's going to be 12 teams. I said the only fear that I have, and not saying that it's more of a fear because it's going to hurt college football. I said it's more of a fear because it's going to set a precedent that I think is going to happen, especially when you see the schedules and rankings and how things are lining up. 1 or 2 losses is not going to kill a Florida State. It's not going to kill an Oregon. It's not going to kill let's say Utah. Those are the best teams in college football. Not saying just those teams, but what you want is you want the best teams in college football to play in the college football playoffs. So when you look towards the end, let's say you have a Clemson. Clemson's a great example. Say you have a Clemson that could very well find themselves at the end of the year with 2 or 3 losses, meaning they'll probably be 9-3. There's a good shot that Clemson makes it over, let's say, a Liberty, who had an incredible season last year. If Liberty does not win their conference, there's a good shot that Liberty does not make it into the college football playoffs over a team like Clemson. We kind of saw that last year. Alabama and Texas making it over someone like Florida State. Florida State, who won the ACC, but they did not look good in the ACC championship, even though they won. Their star quarterback was out, Jordan Travis, and they just looked inept. The committee said, all right, yes, we know that throughout the regular season and when Jordan Travis was healthy, Florida State more than deserves to be in the college football playoffs. However, that is not the case right now. The case right now is that team looks god-awful. They're playing just a defense style. Like, we don't want that. So we're going to put Alabama. We're going to put Texas. You're going to see that a lot because I look at a team like Oregon. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily going to apply to Oregon because I think that Oregon, especially when we talk about Dan Lanning and his defense and the offense, I think Oregon's going to be one of the best teams in college football. But you look at Oregon. Oregon has to play a daunting schedule. They have to play Ohio State. I think they have to play Michigan. Like, they have to play some teams. And I think they have to play Washington as well. There's a good chance that they could lose 1, 2, maybe even all 3 of those games. However, if they just sweep through the rest of the college football scene and went out convincingly outside of all of them, I don't even think they have to play in their conference championship. They just have to look great against everyone else. So then when you look up, if they lost to Ohio State, and Ohio State is like number 1 or 2, if they lose to a Michigan and Michigan finds their way up the ranks, if they lose to a Washington and Washington finds their way up the ranks, there's a good shot Oregon makes it. However, if you have someone like Liberty, if you have someone like Boise State, who they maybe win 1 or 2 or lose 1 or 2, or someone like Georgia Tech. If someone like Georgia Tech, who they beat Florida State, somehow they beat, let's say, Clemson, but they lose not lose every other game, but they are in a dogfight and they find themselves, let's say, 9-3, and you have a Clemson that's 9-3. Clemson is going to make it over them. So I say all that to say, I'm going to give my predictions for the college football playoffs. And there are going to be teams that's left out. I think the final iteration of this is probably going to come in a few years, is maybe 16 teams. I think that is, if you already expanded 12, what's 4 more teams? 4 more teams allows a team like Liberty, allows a team like Georgia Tech, allows a team like maybe USC, allows a team like those to UCLA, if they have a good year, to get into the college football playoffs. But when we talk about the teams that are going to be in the playoffs, I think there are a few locks. And what I mean by that is, even if they look, there are teams that if they go 9-3, they are still going to make the college football playoffs. I don't predict that they go 9-3, but I think Ohio State is a lock. Ohio State is for sure a lock. I think Georgia, who is the number 1 ranked team right now, they're a lock. I think Oregon is a lock. I think Alabama is a lock. Now, if they have I'll say this, if they have a terrible year with, Kellen DeBoer and just everything new, they might not make it. But I do think that Alabama is going to be a really good team. Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Alabama. And I think the last lock is Texas. I think Texas is a for sure lock. Texas, that's a great team. And a lot of people think that team could be good enough to make it to the college football. To make it to all the way to the national championship. So outside of that, there's other teams that I think are for sure going to make it. I think Utah, when you have Cam Rising, you see what they did first game. Utah is always one of those teams that they usually play spoiler. They may not be amongst the best of the best, but they usually play spoiler. Whether it was a few years ago when they beat Caleb Williams in USC, they beat Oregon a couple years ago. Utah is not the team to play with. But I have Utah. I think that this is going to be a really good year for Miami. I don't know exactly how, they're going to look, but they have a bunch of transfers, not 43 of them, but they have a bunch of transfers. Their defense looks like it's going to be really good. I think Miami has a really good shot of making it. Obviously, when you play in the ACC, you have to worry about Clemson. You have to worry about Florida State. But I think Miami is good enough. I think Notre Dame is going to be good enough. The thing that really helps Notre Dame in these type of situations, it kind of helps and hurts. I think if they have a really good record, it helps that they're independent. If they have like a okay to iffy record, it does not help them at all. They have to start off strong, and I think that Notre Dame, they're going to have a good schedule. They have a really light schedule, even though they have some daunting games. I think that Notre Dame is going to be really good, and I think that they're going to be one of the teams in the college football playoffs. I think Penn State is going to be good. There have been, the last few years under Coach Franklin, they have been in contention. Like if it was expanded to 12, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, almost every year that Coach Franklin has been the coach for Penn State, if it was a 12-team college football playoffs, Penn State would have been in it every single year. Maybe 1 year, no. But I think Penn State is continuously a good team. They have to beat a top-tier team, but I think they're able to, especially when you talk about the whiteout game, especially when you talk about it's really tough to play in Penn State. I think Penn State's going to make it. I think Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss is going to make it. I really like what that organization is doing. I like what that team is doing. I think Lane Kiffin, how quirky he is and how he does rub a lot of people outside of Ohio or Ole Miss the wrong way. I think that he's a really good coach, and I like the direction. I like the schedule. The schedule's not that tough for Ole Miss, and I think they're gonna win. I'm not win, but I think they're gonna make it into the college football playoffs. I just said Alabama. The hardest one were these last two. I did not know who I was going to pick between Clemson and Florida State, and who I was going to pick between Liberty and Boise State. Let's start with the Clemson and Florida State. Clemson, Dabo, who is obviously the head coach of Clemson, is religious on not having anything to do with the transfer portal. You might get one or two transfers, but Dabo does not care about the transfer portal at all. That usually comes back to bite them. However, one thing that Clemson and Dabo does well is they retain a lot of their players. If you don't go to the draft, you don't get if you don't graduate, a lot of times their players stay. That's something that has happened a lot for Clemson, whether you talk about Trevor Lawrence, whether you talk about Deshaun Watson. A lot of time, hell, T. Higgins, a lot of times their players stay. And I did not like what I saw. I think Florida State's going to be really good. I'm not going to jump to conclusions and say they're going to be trash. I don't believe they're going to be trash. But I did not like what I saw from DJU, because a lot of the things that he struggled with a year before at Clemson, he struggled with game one, whether you're talking about reads, whether you're talking about holding the ball too long, some of the iffy throws, a lot of which should have been intercepted. I think Clemson, their defense is going to be better. And their quarterback, while if you look on paper, it's not the best quarterback, I think their defense and their ability to run the ball and the fact that they have a lot of upperclassmen, I have Clemson making the college football playoffs over a Florida State. Because I think there are going to be two ACC teams to make it. And I think Miami, especially with the strength of their schedule, they're going to make it. I think it's between because Clemson has a tough schedule. I just think Clemson's going to make it over Florida State. And the last one, I love what Liberty did last year. I think they had sort of a magical run until they ran into Oregon in the bowl game. But I think Boise is just a better overall team. And I think Boise is going to win their conference. And I just like Boise. I think the quarterback for Liberty is the best player. But I just like Boise State as a whole. So I'm not going to necessarily predict, yes, I will. So if we go to the college football playoffs, I'm not going to give my rankings, but I think that the top few teams are going to be Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, and let's say Texas. I think that the national championship is going to be Georgia and Oregon. I think Georgia and Oregon, because I just think Georgia is the most loaded. You have Caleb Beck. It's just loaded. I think Oregon, Ohio State obviously is up there as well, but I just think the defense of Oregon and the speed of which they can operate their offense, a lot rides on Dylan Gabriel. I think Oregon and Georgia is going to meet in the national championship. I know a lot of people are saying Ohio State in Georgia, or they're saying Ohio State and Texas, or they're saying Georgia and Texas. Yes, I know I'm an Oregon fan. I don't care. I'm saying that Oregon is going to be in the national championship against Georgia. Last time Oregon played Georgia, it was a bloodbath. Oregon they got blown off the field. But I think that being in the Big Ten, different competition, better defenses, whether you talk about Michigan, Ohio State, you would probably have to play Ohio State twice. I'm going to say it. I got Oregon winning the national championship. I love what Dan Lanning's doing there. I love that his focus on balance. Incredible defense, incredible offense. And I think a lot rides on Dylan Gabriel. I think Dylan Gabriel has a chance to be one of the best college football quarterbacks this year, especially under Dan Lanning, especially when you saw how good or how Bo Nix transformed from what he was at Auburn to what he was at Oregon. A lot of it was because of the skills or the being coached by Dan Lanning. I got Oregon winning the national championship. Now, that's sort of the homer in me, but I do think that they're going to be really good, honestly. So, again, my college football playoffs is Ohio State, Georgia, Utah, Miami, Notre Dame, Texas, Oregon, Penn State, Ole Miss, Alabama, Clemson, and Boise State. My national championship is Georgia against Oregon, and I have Oregon winning the national championship. So, let me know what you guys think. Obviously, you can't really predict college sports like that, especially with these college football playoffs. It's pretty much one and done. So, I'm excited though. This is going to be a great year of college football, and can't wait. And there you have it, man. That's been today's episode of the Unpopular Podcast. I truly, truly, truly appreciate you guys. If you want an Unpopular Podcast shirt, hoodie, sweater, long sleeve joggers, the link is in the description below. Add multiple different colors, multiple different designs. Get your Unpopular Podcast merch today. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to get as many subscribers as possible. I appreciate every single person that has subscribed, that will subscribe, that tells a friend to tell a friend. If you're at this point in the episode and you haven't subscribed, I don't know what to tell you, bro. But I do appreciate you. Please subscribe to the YouTube. Also, I know that there's some people that only listen to me on DSPs. There's some people that only listen to me on YouTube. If you listen to me on DSPs, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Pandora, wherever you get your DSPs and you listen to the Unpopular Podcast, please follow, please subscribe. No platform is more important than the other. I appreciate all of you guys. Also, please follow the socials, whether that's Instagram, TikTok. I post pretty much daily, whether you talk about extended reels, whether you talk about stories. We can go back and forth. That's probably the quickest way to get to me. If you want to tell me how much you love my take, tell me how much you hate my take. If you want to debate, just go to the socials and follow, and we can go back and forth. If you keep it respectful, I don't mind going back and forth with you. It just means that you're listening to what I say and you care deeply about it, so I appreciate it anyway. So yeah, TikTok, Instagram, please follow the socials. I appreciate you guys, and I can't wait for this year of college football playoffs. Let's go, Oregon. Until next time, much love.